Yeah. Good.
How you doing? Oh, you brought your books. Yeah. All right. Great. Yeah, I like that.
It's really faded, but it's my favorite. It's like a really aesthetic almost. It's thick and sticky. I used to make fun of old music that like this.
I'm name all of this. Good.
Yeah.
That way.
Yes. But anyway, I had an operation where bullets, and the friend gave me a whole bunch of these. And I wouldn't use that. His old man was flying within a pocket.
Very comfortable.
Yeah. I felt like some town. Wow.
Yeah, it did order it.
Did you have any names? Yes, I did. Yeah. Yeah.
You folks, first
So one.
Yeah, I did.
So.
Interested in what makes our education here. Appealing to some people.
I didn't. Of course.
That is like the governor does.
I mean, that just be. I'm going to. Oh, I'm going to buy it here. You have that pretty black. Yeah. I'm selling. It just made me sick because I'm sitting. Yeah. I collect some bags. Big huge. I have never eaten. I've never seen. Yeah. So that doesn't. It looks like snow.
I got you committed now. You're gonna go with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes,
I'm on her dog.
I'm ready already. I used Google Gemini to help me out.
I don't have a problem. I brought my notes.
It is, it's temptation. It's very tempting.
I don't like to do it because it's really because
I did Epstein already. My assistant did it.
oh, okay.
I'll share that with you before the break. That's it.
And we also definitely. Said I haven't had a shower. It's starting to spring. Yeah. So that's like. Yeah.
All the time he said that.
Pretty trial.
Well, it's 3 o'clock. I'm excited to see everybody. Got a couple people on Zoom. Sound is working. You people hear it? I think we might as well get started. It's time, although maybe more people will be coming in. Not a good idea to get in the habit of waiting for people, I don't think. Today I'm going to deal mostly with the up until the 20th century, which is quite a bit of history. We obviously can't cover all of it. We'll hit what is of interest. I also want to talk a bit more about research methods and how you guys can do some more presentations, but I'll do that in the middle rather than at the beginning, so it'll be together with the break. Today I'm going to start with the Puritans, which is where we started. But to deal with the Puritans, you really have to go back a little further into English history, because the Puritans were split off from the politics and the Civil War that was going on in England at the time. This was 1642 to 1651 was the Civil War, but there was a whole series of things. English history is very detailed. Winston Churchill once said, history is just one damn thing after another, which is how a lot of school children hear it. It's not true of his history books. His history books are very entertaining and sold very well, so he didn't make it that way. What happened in England, you may remember Edward VIII, I believe it was, whose wife produced a daughter but no son, so he wanted to divorce her. And in order to do that, he had to split away from the Catholic Church, and they started the Church of England. And then he could divorce his wife. His second wife didn't produce a son either, so he trumped up charges of, what do you call it when you cheat on your husband? Adultery, and executed her. He executed two of his wives and started a new church, which he was the head of. And I think you can see that a church that's headed by a guy like that doesn't have a whole lot of moral suasion. So a lot of people, they criticize the Catholics for good reason. And of course, there'd been that split in the Catholic Church, and the Protestant Reformation and all of that had gone on in Europe. So this was a period when the churches were splitting. In England, you had at that time two major groups, the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers were the aristocrats, the royalists, and they had long hair. At that time, long hair was the establishment, short hair was the rebel, unlike in the 1970s when long hair on men was a rebel and short hair was the establishment. The Roundheads were parliamentarians, Cromwell, and Puritans, and they split off into different religions. Now, this is a common phenomenon in human society, that you have splits and schisms, and groups split apart and start fighting mostly with people within their own group. They fight with other groups too, but when you fight with within your own group, we have a split. And you've probably experienced that in various organizations you belong to, places you worked. Here in the Unitarian Church, we had a big brouhaha, and there's always an issue. There's a policy issue that people deal with, but there's also underlying issues. And people tend to think that the underlying issues are real, and that the surface issues are maybe just just a veneer. And in this case, the surface issue is all theology. People were fighting about theology, about God, about the Bible. Marx would say the underlying issue was the economic interest, the rise of the urban business class. The bourgeoisie was threatening the aristocracy that owned land. And so Marx would say what really is going on is that. Freud would say what's really going on is anxieties about something, or at least Freudian types of people, or fighting over women and spouses. He thought that all politics really dated back to the alpha male in a pride of lions trying to dominate all the women. And that seems to come up a lot more than you might think. So that's part of it too. If you look at Nietzsche, he says, well, it's just people want power. It's their will to power. And that's it. Power is an end in itself. It doesn't matter how you get it. There's certainly a hell of a lot of that going on in English history and the Civil War, and fighting over who's going to be king and so on. The feminists would say it's the patriarchy, the men wanting to suppress the women. Although in England they did tend to have queens, it took power actually, and so on the highest level. It didn't always work out that way, but that's another interpretation. And we'll be looking at this consistently. This will come up with regard to the charismatic leaders. Usually in a split, you have three groups. You have the purifiers who want to be more pure, and you have the reformists who want to make change. And then you have the middle of the road people who are trying to moderate things one way or another. There may be other terms. In the communist world, it was rectification. It wasn't purification, but really the same thing, going back to the pure doctrine of Karl Marx or Engels or Lenin or whatever. So that's what's going on. Now, what was going on here was a purity movement within the English Church of England called the Puritans. They were a minority within the church, and then they split off and started their own church. And they were really feeling that the Church of England was corrupt, and it had too much ceremony and too much of the inheritance of Catholicism, which is, you have the priests in robes and you have all the ceremony, and they rejected that. And that's the group that came to New England. And that's the group that we started with the Puritans, getting out of England where they weren't being tolerated very well and going to America where you could start a utopia of your own and do things your own way. And that's what we saw going on. This book opens in Puritan Boston. Now, according to their theology, there is an elect of people who are predestined by God to go to heaven. And those are the people who will succeed in going to heaven. And then the rest of the people won't, and there's nothing they can do about it, which is one theology. Many other people say anybody can go to heaven if they do good works and so on and deserve it. That's probably the more common theory. Or that everybody can go all together. The universalists, you get to heaven no matter what. So there's different theories about that. That's what they were arguing about. The problem with the doctrine of the elect is that how do you know who's in the elect? God doesn't come down and tell you you're the elect and you and you and you. There's nobody telling you. Now, Max Weber wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, and he thought that led to capitalist behavior in the sense that people worked hard but didn't spend their money and invested it because they wanted to prove to themselves that they were part of the elect. So that is a doctrine that was out there, and the group that settled in Massachusetts believed in that, and they believed that the men who were the ministers who were ruling it were the elect, and they were going to go to heaven and they were going to tell everybody else what to do. The other thing that Protestantism is big in is reading the Bible and interpreting the Bible and more literally. In the Catholic Church, the lay people don't usually have a Bible, and they didn't have it this time at least. This was, of course, some printing presses were just coming. You begin to get the Bible translated into English and other languages. That was the whole thing in Europe too, with the open Bible, and they would believe in reading the Bible, and the Bible is the ultimate authority as opposed to the Pope or the Archbishop or any authority, which is still a difference you see in the churches on that doctrine. Now, do good works help you get into heaven? You can't get into heaven with good works, but if you do a lot of good works, that proves you're part of the elect that's going to get into heaven. So it's sort of a double twist.
Yeah.
But good works can include running a business and making money. It doesn't mean charitable stuff. We tend to think of that as what it means now. It meant if you had a good business and were successful, so God was showing that you were part of the elect, and that was the setting. Now this tends to carry over, and that's the other point I wanted to make. This is a book by Digby Baltzell called Puritan Boston and Quaker Philadelphia. He argues that the whole history of those two cities depends upon the fact that one was a Puritan city and one was the Quaker city. Quaker city went into decline over a long period of time because the Quakers didn't really want to do politics. They ran the state, but they didn't want to do much, and most of them resigned at the revolution because they didn't support it. And so Philadelphia is where the country started. You know, the Independence Hall and all that is still in Philadelphia. The buildings are there, but New York City took off being secular. Boston went into this puritanical thing. New York took anybody. So that's a theory. Another one is Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible. How many people have ever seen The Crucible? It's very popular. That was about the witch trials, but it was also an analogy to McCarthy in the 1950s. That's what it was taken as really. The McCarthy hearings were another witch hunt, and it was a replay of what was going on. So that it's like saying, you can look back at this history and see what you sort of see a template for what's happening later. And that's part of what we're going to do. Now, this is a charismatic person I want to introduce that isn't in the book, Roger Williams. You don't hear about him that much. I wanted to introduce him because I wanted to have a little more of a positive influence here. I don't want us to just focus on people that we think were misguided and had problems, although they tend to be more interesting. And I did that with Cotton Mather. I brought him up as the expert who was the expert on interpreting the Bible, which is a form of expertise, which really doesn't go anywhere. It's been a failure consistently for 2,000 years, and yet people are still doing it. Even at that time, Isaac Newton. You've heard of Isaac Newton. I think I have a slide in here on him too, maybe. Yeah, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So maybe I didn't get that slide in. But Isaac Newton, you've heard of him as a physicist and a chemist, right? He's thought of as generally the most brilliant scientist ever. Probably the most brilliant human being ever. This is Isaac Newton, the theologian. He actually spent half his time studying the Bible and trying to analyze it mathematically and make predictions about the real world based on the Bible. And he wrote 2.5 million words on theology. And he didn't have a typewriter to dictate. He wrote that with a pen. And that's a tremendous focus on trying to explain the real world based on what the Bible says. And the Bible has prophecies. You go to some of those books at the end of the New Testament, they give all kind of prophecies, but they're very poetical. And people try to relate them and say, is this prophecy coming true? Is it coming true now? One of the things you have is that the world is going to go through a time of troubles and great chaos before Jesus returns. And people usually say, well, there's a lot of chaos out there. Jesus is about to return. That's one of the things that Newton got into, is predicting when Jesus is going to return, which there's a whole history of that. Over 2,000 years, people have been coming out with these predictions, none of which have come true. Generally speaking, it turns out that he's going to come in about 5 years from whenever they make the prediction. It's almost always Jesus is coming soon. Newton did not do that. He did the math, and he said not until after 2060. Which was like 300 years in the future. So people aren't much interested in something that's not going to happen till 300 years in the future. His whole thing of looking at the Bible to predict things in the real world didn't work. Whereas his science worked. He predicted the motion of the planets. He came up with the calculus. He did all kinds. That is failed, but a lot of people at that period of time were doing that sort of thing. And they still people are still doing that. So that is the climate that was going on. And you see then that Anne Hutchinson, who is the first person discussed in our book, she came to Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. She was in her she was just about late 30s when she came. They were followers of a of a preacher in England who left for Massachusetts, and they decided to go and follow him. When I say they, I mean her and her husband. She was a married woman, a respectable married woman, and not only that, married to a very successful man. Her husband was a cotton merchant and made a lot of money, and left the whole religion thing to her. You know, he didn't care too much about it. He made money, and she stayed home and had babies, which is what women were supposed to do. So when she went to Massachusetts, she brought along her 10 children, varying in age from newborn to 19. And she had more after she got to Massachusetts. But her father had been a minister. He was actually jailed for a couple of years for theological errors and let out and revived and taken back in. And he gave her a good education. He and his wife had only daughters. They had no son. And for whatever reason, they believed that women should be educated. So she had a tremendous education in the Bible. And she could quote the Bible better than just about any preacher. And everything that she wanted to argue for, she could find a quote to go for it. That's one of the nice things about the Bible, is that if you know it well enough, you can usually find a quote to support whatever position you want to take, because it's like an anthology, all written by all different people, and there's all kind of things in there. And many of them are metaphors, or they're subtle, and you can interpret them in different ways. She was a genius at that. I think I cut out on myself when I talk about Roger Williams. He was what I would call the expert archetype in terms of our books categories. He was a Puritan minister, but he was also a scholar and a intellectual, but his interest was language. He was a linguist. He had a great gift for languages, and he knew, of course, everybody in the English elite knew Latin and Greek. You had to know those, but he also knew the continental languages, French and German and some others. And when he got to Massachusetts, he said, you know, these people are speaking another language. I better study that up. And he went out and learned the native language of the Narragansett people, the people that are right around there. And he actually later published the first book on the native languages of the Americas. Of course, there's a lot of them and so on. I don't know how good his book was, but it's like an anthropologist going out and actually getting new information, which people didn't have. And he learned to talk to those people. Now, that turned out to be a very useful skill, because they were fighting wars. They were fighting a war with the Pequod, and he negotiated an alliance with the Narragansett to support the settlers. And he was a great diplomat as well as a linguist. He got talked to them and said, oh, you know, you don't want to go with the Pequot, stick with us. And he worked out an alliance using his linguistic skills. And he also felt that to keep order in the colony and avoid splits, that they ought to separate religion from the state, from the government. The government should not punish people for religious offenses. That was his idea. And he called it that the wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. And that we can all get along. We can all have our churches. We can believe anything we want in theology and kick people out of our church if we want to, but we're not going to hang them. We're not going to chop off their heads for a religious offense. We're not going to put them in jail. That was his theory, which was a great theory. It was one that Thomas Jefferson picked up on. Our American founding fathers, they said, if we're going to make a country out of America and get everybody together, you know, that's what we're going to have to do. You know, there's all these religions. The Quakers down in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, totally different. Quakers believe you can get insight directly from God. You don't have to just go by what's in the Bible. Continuing revelation. That's a different theology. So he came up with this idea. The result was that he was banished immediately from the colony because they didn't like his ideas. He was banished for coming up, I think I have a quote in here, diverse, new, and dangerous opinions. That was what he was banished for. He was told he'd have to leave the colony. He was sick at the time. They let him wait till he recovered. 3 days before the sheriff came, he took off and walked through the woods down to what's now Rhode Island to get away from the authorities because of his dangerous doctrine of separating the church and state. Here's a little clip of how he's remembered.
My name is Roger Williams. I was born in England in 1603, at a time when religion and politics were tightly intertwined. As a Puritan, I shared many of the beliefs of those who sought to reform the Church of England. I believed that the church and the state must be separate, that each individual had the right to worship according to their own conscience. These ideas were dangerous in England, so in 1630, I set sail for the New World, hoping to find a place where my beliefs could flourish. I arrived in Massachusetts Bay, but it didn't take long for my views to clash with the Puritan leadership. I spoke openly against their practice of blending church and state. I argued that it was wrong to take land from the Native Americans without fair payment. By 1635, I was banished from the colony and forced to flee into the wilderness in the dead of winter. Yet, I did not give up. With the help of the Narragansett people, who showed me great kindness, I survived and found a new home. In 1636, I founded the colony of Rhode Island, where freedom of religion would be a cornerstone.
We don't have actual recordings of people back that far, so we have to rely on these reconstructions, and we can't say how accurate they are. This is a copy of his book, A Key to the Language of America, which was one of the languages of America, really. There are many others, but he was getting started. Here's some artworks of his marching through the snow to get to Rhode Island. 55 miles he walked on his own. And he went back to England and negotiated a charter for a new colony. You couldn't just start a colony. You had to get a charter from the king and all that. He had great diplomatic skills and connections in London. He went back to London and got a charter. He's viewed as the founder of the state of Rhode Island. This is the a statue of him that's there. So that is in Providence today. He's viewed well today. So history has judged him well. Anne Hutchison was a biblical scholar, among other things. What she had a lot of experience with was having babies. And not just having babies, but helping other women to have babies. She, in effect, became a midwife. She would go when a baby was about to be born. She would come and help with the delivery. I don't know that the doctors at that time were much help, or physicians with delivering babies. But so she was very popular in the community. But she also was a great preacher. But she couldn't be a preacher because women couldn't be preachers. But you could have a discussion of the sermon after church in your house. So people would gather in her house to discuss the week's sermon. And more people would come. She was more and more in demand. And not only women started to come, men started to come too, which got to be very threatening. And she got to be dangerous to the local people. And she was, however, not very diplomatic. She was very critical of the preachers. She thought they didn't preach under the seal of the Spirit, which means basically they were very academic. They were very scholarly. They would read aloud from the Bible as if they were a judge quoting the law, but they didn't inspire people. They didn't have much of the Spirit. She didn't say you could accomplish things. You could get into heaven from good works, but you could determine whether you were in the elect by insight directly from God. How are you going to determine it if it's not from God? It seems to make sense. Her husband was making money, and she didn't. wasn't concerned about that, but she basically challenged the power structure and insinuated herself into the affections of many. How's that for an offense? Insinuating yourself into the affections of many seems like a generally a good thing. A lot of people liked her. That's what they mean, and they were upset about it. They started having trials to try her, and she seemed to think that she had gotten revelations directly from God, and that was a violation of theology. One of the ministers said, one Mrs. Hutchinson, a member of the church at Boston, a woman of ready wit and a bold spirit, brought over with her two dangerous errors, that the person of the Holy Ghost dwells in a justified person, and then no sanctification can help evidence to us our justification. Now, how's that for an issue to fight over? What does it mean even? I mean, it's very abstract. You got to think there's something else going on, which the feminists would say it was a woman undercutting the prestige of the male hierarchy, the patriarchy that dominated the colony, which I think is a big part of what it was. I have to agree with that. She's been seen as a martyr for free speech, the separation of church and state. There were others. There's a woman named Mary Dyer who defected to the Quakers, gave up on being a Puritan altogether, which Ann Hutchinson tried to stick within the doctrine of the Puritans. And Mary Dyer was banned from Boston. She kept coming back. They couldn't get rid of her, so they chopped her head off. They were very serious about these things, which are things that still exist today in the sense of we have all these churches right here in Marietta, and they still have these theological differences, but people don't seem to care about them that much. Like I'm in the Unitarian church. There's a Church of the Trinity somewhere. We're not going to have a war between the Unitarians and the Trinitarians about who's right about the Bible or something. At that time, they fought about that. In our time, we fight about other things, as more Republicans and Democrats. At any rate, she was banned and took off. Took off for Rhode Island, actually. This clip has good art.
Although the Puritans separated from the Church of England formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there was a group among them who felt the Puritans were losing their strict conviction and wanted further separation. One member of this group was a charismatic woman who almost destroyed the unity of the Puritans by taking separatism to an extreme. Her name was Ann Hutchinson, and she was married to a man whom Governor John Winthrop described as very mild-tempered and fully guided by his wife. Together they had 15 children.
What she started doing first was having meetings in her house on Sunday afternoon. People would get together and discuss the sermon, which is what Puritans did in England, and it was a good thing, you know.
Hutchinson claimed that good works and a holy life were no sure sign of salvation, implying that the saved had no need to obey local laws and religious codes. She believed that the Holy Spirit was already in the hearts of true believers. Her stance, which was called antinomianism, from the Greek word meaning against the law, undermined the power of local officials. In addition, her behavior challenged the idea that women should be deferential and retiring. Still, she continued to draw people to her sermons.
But then pretty soon it wasn't just women coming, it was men coming, and it was huge crowds coming. And more it seemed like they weren't just discussing the sermon. Hutchinson was actually presenting her viewpoint. And so they felt that she had stepped over a line.
Maybe that's enough of that. You can watch these at your own. I have them linked from the slides here. I talked about Cotton Mather before, the witch trials. I'm not going to go over him again. Let's see. Video. Isaac Newton. Okay, I'm going to move on. We got a lot of history to cover here. I've only got up to chapter 2 here. she starts talking about the woman in the Congo. I'm not going to go into that as we're just doing the United States, but it does show how there's worldwide, this trends were much the same in terms of theology, the emergence of women. What we're looking at here is Pennsylvania and the Quakers. The Quakers had a totally different theology, which was not so much on the scripts and what's written, but it's in terms of silent worship and getting insight directly from God. Benjamin Lay was a dwarf. He was only 4'3" or something. His arms were as long as his legs. But he was a dedicated anti-slavery person based on his observation in Barbados. And most of the Quakers had slaves. The Quakers in Barbados in particular, the average household had 12 slaves just to care for the household and so on. He decided that that was wrong. He interrupted Quaker meetings shouting, stood outside with bare feet in the snow, haranguing people. He refused to wear clothes made with slave labor, made all his own clothes. He would make dramatic appearance in a meeting. He, during time with a military uniform and a sword, stabbed himself and the blood came pouring out, which was fake blood. It wasn't really blood, but he had very dramatic action. As you see with some people today who are making sort of theatrical statements and pushing people. He was not trying to go for the compromise. He was going for basically slavery is wrong. All slave keepers that keep the innocent in bondage are apostates. Walking through the snow barefoot. This is something that the religious people have done over history, including George Fox, who's the founder of Quakerism. He discusses that in his autobiography. He walks into Lichfield, a town in England, 2 miles through the snow barefoot and crying, "Woe to the bloody city of Lichfield." Some people thought that was a sign of a mental illness, which it may be, but it's also part of the cultural repertoire of the Fool for Christ, as it was called, is to act. You're so taken by the spirit that you act crazy. He basically pushed the idea that slavery was wrong and eventually persuaded most of the Quakers. Most of the Quakers reached that decision. And it's not based on the Bible. If you read in the Bible accepts slavery. It doesn't say much about it, but it says, don't be jealous of your neighbor's slave and so on. So it's based on meditation, based on getting the word from on high or wherever you're getting it from. So he had a success as an odd sort of person. He is the most badass dwarf.
You heard of Benjamin Lay? Born in 1682, Lay was a Quaker dwarf who stood at just over 4 feet tall, but had a towering impact on the abolitionist movement. Despite his stature, Lay's convictions were monumental. He lived in a cave, wore simple clothes, and adopted a vegan diet, rejecting the luxuries tainted by slavery. In 1738, Lay dramatically interrupted a Quaker meeting, slashing a book filled with red juice to symbolize the blood of slaves, shocking attendees into awareness. He tirelessly campaigned against the inhumanity of slavery, facing ridicule and ostracization, but his relentless spirit paved the way for future abolitionists. Lay's radical actions and unwavering beliefs highlight an incredible journey of courage and conviction in the fight for human rights. Have you heard of it?
Now, George Wakefield is the moderate, the middle of the road, a person who didn't push things very far. He was an evangelist who focused on internal transformation. He was not an abolitionist. He didn't want to get rid of slavery, but he wanted to humanize slavery, treat slaves better. He spent a lot of time and money raising money for an orphanage for Black children. His main claim to fame was his loud voice and his ability to speak. This was before we had microphones. And Benjamin Franklin did a test pacing out how big his audience was, how far it was. You could get 500 feet away and still hear him. He estimated that 30,000 people could hear him preaching at the same time, which was important at that time because that was, you know, a tremendous number of people compared to who you could reach in church. Most churches accommodated maybe 200 people. He preached a story of personal salvation. Here are some quotes from his speeches. I'm sorry we don't have a clip of him speaking. We'd love to hear him, but there were no recording at that time. You must be born again. This is not the word of man, but of God. You must have the Spirit of Christ. Now, this was a general change in religion that led to what was known as the Great Awakening, which was a period of religious enthusiasm. Preachers started being emotional and personal and talking about their feelings and what happened to them and how, you know, why they believe something and why it's important, and not quoting scripture and being sort of authorities. He was sort of the pioneer of this, but it became a general thing. And these put up a tent around the outside of town. You have a revival meeting. You call people in, and people are saved. Saved means you've got to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. You can come up and do that. You don't have to have done any good works. You don't have to have made money or anything. You don't have to study. I could become Jewish. I went through a conversion to become Jewish for my second marriage. You have to study things. You have to know things. Even the Catholic Church, you have to study. You have to pass basically a test or something. You know, this is coming in with emotion. Now, Whitefield, he would break down and cry at his services, and he seemed to do that every time he gave a speech. And he had speeches that he kept repeating, but it sounded like they were spontaneous. People didn't know that he was repeating them because there weren't recordings. They didn't have a record of his previous speech. But he set the new flavor of religion in terms of revivals, in terms of what's known as evangelical religion, and that movement is still around today. There's still a lot of people into that, and Billy Graham types of people are preaching similar types of sermons. They have the radio and the television. They don't have to, and certainly a microphone in the church. I think they don't have to have such a loud voice, but the style is similar. Here's a clip about him.
George Whitefield preached to more people than any man who ever lived before microphones existed. This 18th century evangelist drew crowds of 30,000 people in open fields when most church buildings held only 200. Benjamin Franklin himself calculated Whitefield's voice could reach 30,000 people outdoors without amplification. Born poor in England, Whitefield became the most famous person in America before George Washington. He crossed the Atlantic 13 times, preaching from Georgia to Maine. His dramatic sermons made hardened men weep and transformed entire communities. Even his enemies admitted his power. Whitefield sparked the Great Awakening, the revival that shaped America's spiritual foundation. He preached his final sermon just hours before his death at age 55, collapsing while still calling souls to Christ. His legacy lived on through the thousands he trained and the millions he reached. One man, one voice, changed two nations forever through the power of the gospel. If this spoke to you, comment, Amen.
Okay. I think we have time to do another chapter here. Move along. I'm on chapter 3 now. Now we moved along a bit in history. The British Empire went into crisis. We had the American Revolution, which we know about that. The problem with the American Revolution is that how do you have a revolution and stop it? how do you keep it from going too far? And they were very well aware of what had happened in France with the overthrow of the monarchy and the chopping off the heads of the king, and then you had the terror and the setting up the guillotines and chopping off people's heads. So we had an elite in the country that wanted independence, break away from the English crown, but they didn't want to go all the way to some sort of popular demagogy democracy. And that was the context at that time. Who came along was George Washington. Now, how many people here have heard of George Washington? Anybody not heard of George Washington? You're Washington County, right? I mean, he's, how much do we actually know about him, however? He's on the dollar bill, which is sort of too small a unit of currency. We're one of the few countries that still has a paper bill that small. What was his big claim to fame? Why was he so charismatic? He was a general. He was not a particularly successful one, however. If you look at his history, he won 3 of the 9 battles that he fought. He was very tall. He was very handsome. He rode a white horse. And he was very popular among the elite of the other founding fathers, the people who were guiding the revolution. They trusted him. He was a very trustworthy person. He was honest, and he was not out seizing power. And pretty much they decided that he was the best symbol for the revolution. Now, people, it seems, were desperate for a symbol, were desperate for a leader who could reassure them that things were going to be okay, that we'd had a revolution, but we're not going to fall into chaos and resolve. That seems to be why he is so successful. Americans were desperate for a great man. All the historians who deal with this say that there was that. And when he would come into town, people would line up and wait. And, you know, he made a very good impression. He had a very good bearing. He rode a horse well. And he was not out for himself. After he won the revolution, he went back to his farm. They finally called him back to be president and made him president a second time. And then he went home. And that was really unprecedented. Probably the most striking thing he did was retire and not become the king of America, which he could have done. They would have made him king if he had wanted to. So he became the symbol of America. You can see that in the artwork, as you see. These are not actually photographs. These are paintings, I'm sure. But you see it's jazzed up. I don't think he actually rode exactly like that with a flag behind him and so on. But that is what he came to symbolize. He reassured women that their traditional roles were okay. They didn't have to become preachers or whatever. So we can look at the contrast between George Whitefield, who was emotional, electrifying, voice-driven, George Washington, quiet, dignified, presence-driven, a dignified physical presence, horsemanship, dress, bearing. He was restrained in his expression of emotion. Those are the things that he's known for. Here is a clip of maybe his reputation, I guess what people think of for him.
In 1776, George Washington's army was outnumbered, starving, and on the brink of collapse. Most soldiers had lost hope. The revolution was almost over. But on Christmas night, Washington made a daring choice. He led his men across the icy Delaware River to launch a surprise attack. That single bold move turned despair into victory
He's rolling
and
the boat
reignited the fight for freedom. And from that freezing night, a new nation was born, followed from more hidden history.
Okay, so that's the image he has. He saved the country. He won the war. This is the classic painting of him crossing the Delaware. He surprised the British Army in Trenton and turned the tide in the war. As far as I know, I have not studied the history of the Revolutionary War very intensively. Maybe some of you know more about it. Does anybody know what the caption to this picture was?
Hey,
I don't think it's actually true that he stood up like that while they were crossing the Delaware. Whether he was actually helping to row, as we saw in the other video, I don't know. But not a good way to stand up in a small rowboat overloaded with soldiers. But that is his image, and we're sticking to it. He's very popular. Contrasting figure from the same time, the public universal friend, otherwise known as Jemima Wilkinson. Now, she was a Quaker, and she had a severe illness, probably typhus, and almost died. Some people might say she died and came back to life. As some people say they died and came back to life, but that's sort of like a very short-term death. Your whole body is not decayed. When she came back, she decided she was neither a man nor a woman. She was America's first non-gendered person, which there was no cultural understanding of how you could be that, to be non-binary, as we might call it today. And she basically was a traveling preacher. The Quakers had that tradition of people who would travel from meeting to meeting and sort of inspire people. George Fox himself came to America and traveled through all the meetings to inspire people. Some people saw her as the second coming of Christ, or as a vessel for the Spirit of God. And there's what does it mean to say Christ returned? Does he have to return in the same body that he had 2,000 years ago? He seems to have said he would be back, according to the Bible, he would be back in the lifetime of the people who were listening to him. They would have recognized him. But if his spirit came back, would it come back in somebody else's body? Does it have to look like him? There's debates about that, and people have taken it as meaning different things. She didn't say that she was the second coming of Christ or anything. I'm using she as the pronoun, but the public friend avoided pronouns. He did not use pronouns. She tried to get people to talk to her, didn't use any pronoun. They did not have a non-gendered pronoun. And she didn't want, it's hard in English. You have to say somebody's either a he or a she. That's inherent in the language, but she was opposed to that. He moved towards evangelical religion, and she was actually expelled from her meeting for being too evangelical. Ann Lee, you know about the Shakers. Shakers are famous for their furniture and so on. She is another woman who was a inspiring preacher. She was a woman. She never had any doubts about her gender, but she opposed sex, as did the public universal friend. Perhaps because they had bad experiences. So many children died. So many women died in childbirth. The public universal friend, her mother had died while she was young, giving childbirth. They went through various, they sort of viewed the consequences of sex as not worth it. Now, you could raise the question, well, how is the species going to reproduce if we don't have any children? But that wasn't a problem because the end of the world was near. Christ was about to return, the world would end, and the good people would all go to heaven, and therefore we wouldn't have to worry about that. They did a lot of dancing and a lot of chanting, and so on. There were a lot of men as well as women who joined the Shakers, and gradually died out due to not getting children, first of all, and also not having enough new people coming in. So that sort of decayed. Where Jemima Wilkinson and Ann Lee offered free male followers a countercultural off-ramp, Washington restored a sense of power to women's traditional roles. The elites wanted a stable revolution, but they were willing to tolerate some degree of gender-bending, spirit-filled delirium and experiments communal living, as long as they remained on the fringe. What Max Weber called mystagogues, prophets who derived authority from supernatural claims. So the elite in America tolerated all these things. That had to do with the separation of church and state. You know, as long as they're a church, they can go do their thing, and that's fine. And we're not going to tell them what they can believe and what they can't. And you know, we will run the government and keep things under control. You could say that Washington was the anti-prophet. And that's something you could say in any historical period. There'll be the radicals, the purifiers, the people who are pushing things, and there'll be people who are trying to go backwards to the way things used to be. And then there'll be the sort of people in the middle who's, I'm not doing that, I'm standing up against it, and will win. And you might say that's like Joseph Biden coming up and saying, I'll go back, I will be the stable system we had 5-10 years ago. That's a reaction to the trend in the culture. Let's see how much time going here. All right, it's about time to move on to. Let me see it. I want to switch and talk a bit about the analysis of charismatic figures. What I want people to do today, I want each of you to think of at least one charismatic figure you're actually inspired by and you're positive about, as well as one you're negative about, which we have, and to do some analysis of it. I asked people to take the rubric I gave you and fill one of those out for a figure. I've only gotten one. That's from Anita Campbell. Is Anita here today? Where's Anita? There she is. Okay, this is about, you're from Florida, right? You used to live in Florida before you moved to Parkersburg? Let me just show you who she's talking about, Ron DeSantis.
So taking a picture with a lobster, and honestly, the lobster looks way more at ease than he does.
So the lobster has more charisma than he does. Why did you pick him, and what do you want to tell us about it? Here's the sheet that she handed in. We can put up here.
Well, I'm glad you put it up because I am ill prepared, I'm afraid. You know, if you go, okay, individual freedom, law and order, and traditional values, and you've heard this over and over again from a party that wants to lead people into thinking that that is the right party, that is the correct party, the only party. And so he takes that and puts it and infuses things into state law. And so, you know, if you go back and you look at the first one, education system, this anti-woke ideology, he has been able to make changes to the education system, voting system, and governing system in the state. You know, he's created a university that has a very hard right-wing slant that is now facing financial difficulties. But at first, when he created it, It was, just the rage and everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Then, well, back up just a little bit to the education one. I'm sorry. We probably, that's right, I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay, his personality, okay, I don't know about the dominant, except when he is on camera and in front of an audience, then he will appear to be very dominant and controlling. Yes, he is controlling. Although when you talk to him, people say when you talk to him one-on-one or in groups where he feels unfamiliar, he's very much an introvert, and that comes out. So, anyway, I've written it all up there. You can read.
I'd have to say that politically, he doesn't differ that much from Trump, right?
Correct.
And yet, as a personality, he just doesn't carry that, whatever it is about Trump that makes people think he's real. Would you say he seems authentic?
I don't think so, but but remember, we've got 50%ers who, of course, are just going to fall in love with him. The thing is that he is following along the same lines as people who feel like the Project 2025 and all these things that are coming out about change the education system, change the voting system, change the policing methods, change Homeland Security. All these things he's doing in the state of Florida. So, and people in Florida are starting to realize that this is not good for the state of Florida. And that's what's happening. He's very much in line with the right-wing Republican flank and is looking as being a fair-haired son. He's already run once, did abysmally, but now everybody kind of senses that he is being groomed to run as a presidential candidate. So what I'm saying is that he'd be the worst one in the world. You could vote for another Republican as far as I'm concerned, but not Ron DeSantis. How's that?
Okay. Now, he's one of the many people who are going to be out there hoping to be the next Republican president. I don't know that he's not rated very high. I think because of his personality more than anything else.
But when you compare him with Rubio, of course, another Floridian that we're very familiar with, he will outrank and get more votes in play than Rubio. Rubio has offended the Hispanic community down there. And so they're starting to see through him. And that's why DeSantis is kind of rising up. And that's what I'm afraid of. How's that?
Now, Dave Kress told me he was interested in doing Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, God.
Who I thought he's not usually on the list of charismatic people, but maybe he is charismatic in a different way. And charismatic does not mean good. I happen to have some connection to him through my son. My son is a friend of his, as mentioned in the Epstein papers and all of that. So he has some insight based on personal connection, and met with him along with Noam Chomsky, who's a prominent left-wing scholar and linguist. And he felt that Epstein was charismatic on an interpersonal level. And that's one thing I could say that's true probably of George Washington, that he probably had a lot of charisma to the people that he met personally, and they trusted him and wanted him in power. Thus, he was unanimously voted in as president. Now, one of the things that you can do, I know you people are too old to have done this when you were in college. We all were, but you can get ChatGPT to do your homework for you. As people seem to have trouble writing their assignments and filling out their forms and don't have time. And Dave told me that he decided not to do Epstein. He's going to do Eleanor Roosevelt. And I'm glad to have him do that because I assume that's somebody that you admire as I do. So I want each of you to try to think of at least one figure that you actually admire, not instead of the other. You can pick one that you don't as well. It's good to have both, but let's look at that. So I decided to ask ChatGPT to write this paper since Dave wasn't going to do it. And I had a prompt. When you do ChatGPT or any of the large language models, Claude may be better, you give it a prompt. So I started out with this prompt. In what ways could Jeffrey Epstein be said to be charismatic? And it's too large to put into a slide, so I have it here in a Google Docs. Social confidence and ease with elites. He moved comfortably among powerful people, interacted with figures like Clinton, so that gave him prestige. This projected ease, confidence, in a sense that he belonged in elite circles. He made others feel important. Many accounts suggest Epstein tailored his interactions to flatter or intrigue people, positioned himself as a connector. Roy Kahn is the guy who started a lot of the McCarthy, I think, there's an article in the Times talking about him as a dark connector. There are people who are behind the scenes and connect elites together. Showed interest in others' ambitions. That's a classic trait, making people feel seen, valued, or intellectually stimulated. These are the people that met with him. His wealth and financial operations were opaque. He was mysterious. Mystique can enhance perceived charisma. People project significance onto what they don't fully understand. Strategic generosity and patronage. He gave money to various things that gave him a certain prestige. Patronage can create admiration and loyalty. Persuasive and manipulative skill. He could recruit people into his orbit. He used charm, promises, and social pressures. This aligns with what psychologists sometimes call dark charisma. Charm used instrumentally rather than authentically. Was he authentic or not? I think probably he was an authentic sociopath. That's what my son thinks. As opposed to Trump. Trump cares about his family. Trump has some actually feelings for some other people. Epstein does not seem to have any. But that's authentic enough. And it's different. It's just authentically evil, but it's authentic. Association-based charisma. Then they go say, well, that doesn't mean he's good. Charisma is not the same as moral worth. But ChatGPT doesn't want to get into trouble for being supportive. And of course, we don't think that. We know Adolf Hitler had charisma. I know charisma is not necessarily a good thing or necessarily a bad thing. Now, that's too much for an assignment. Suppose you were doing this as a student, and I said you have to hand it in next week, and you wanted to get what you would have to do is tailor your prompt to the task. So this is a longer prompt. And your prompt can be pages long. Prompts don't have to be short. In her book, Spellbound, Molly Worthen says that charisma is a relationship between leader and follower. It reflects the human need to explain and control unseen forces and the power of an all-encompassing, empowering story to make people do things for the storyteller. Apply this analysis to Jeffrey Epstein. Write 50 words describing the story that Jeffrey Epstein tells. So tell it how long an answer you want. I said 50 words. I bet if you count the words, there'll be 50. I could have said approximately 50 words. It would have been approximate. It'll do what it's told. He cast himself as a discreet, powerful connector, someone who could open doors to wealth, science, and influence. His story promised entry into rarefied circles where ambition met opportunity. By implying hidden knowledge and elite access, he made others feel chosen, useful, and complicit in a world just beyond ordinary reach. I thought that's pretty good. If I was grading people, I'd have to give them a pretty good grade on that 50 words, right? That is really driving instructors in college crazy in terms of grading. You know, the students can just turn it into the computer and get the answer. What about his personality? Write 50 words describing his social trends or conflicts these are the questions I took from the rubric that I gave you. This is answering the rubric. He exploited widening inequality, elite networking culture, and the glamour of wealth. An era of deregulated finance and philanthropy blurred scrutiny of power. Celebrity influence and global mobility enabled secrecy. Gender and age hierarchies alongside institutional deference to elites created vulnerabilities he manipulated, while weak accountability systems allowed him abuse to persist. That's a pretty good answer too, I think. How about his personality? 50 words. Calculating, socially adept, and intensely controlling. He projected confidence while concealing motives. He cultivated charm and curiosity to draw others in, yet maintained emotional distance. Risk tolerant and secretive, he exploited ambiguity and power imbalances. His demeanor blended intellectual posturing with manipulation, masking predatory behavior behind a veneer of sophistication and influence. And of course, what it's doing is summarizing what a whole lot of people have written in a whole lot of editorials and articles and have said. It's not an original thinker, but that's mostly what students do in term papers. They summarize what they got from the literature. I think it did pretty well. So that's a tool you can all use. You can go on to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of those and type the questions in and guess answers. What I'm going to ask everybody to do is to pick at least one figure that you actually admire, as well as one that you don't, and figure that out in 10 minutes. We'll have a 10-minute break or whatever long it takes. Hand the sheet back to me with your name on it and the name of the figure you've chosen, and the name of any other figure you were willing to prepare. And then I would like you to do an analysis and send it to me by email during the week. And it's okay if you cheat and have ChatGPT do it. You don't have to write it yourself. We're not grading students here. I don't have to worry about giving you a grade. If I did, I'd have to write it out during class. They couldn't use it. I'm just giving you another sheet of paper. You don't have to fill the whole thing out. Now, this doesn't have to be, each person has somebody different. You want to get together with a group of people and focus on one person, that's fine. That's you to work that out. I'm not going to work out who's in one group. But before you leave today, hand that paper back to me with your name and who it is you would pick as a person you admire. If there's any person that you would like to be able to follow, as well as a person you are interested in that is not a person you admire. So this will be our break. It's already 4:10. So we'll break for at least 10 minutes. If anybody needs to go to the bathroom or whatever, we can work on getting this together.
Hey, Ted? Ted? I'm not clear on the assignment. You want us to fill these out today or just give you a name or?
What?
Do you want us to fill these out today? Or just give you a name?
You don't have to fill all of that out now. Just use that as a sheet of paper.
What's the name?
What's the name?
Who are you gonna work on next week?
I've got more copies if you want to take a copy home.
Somebody you admire, there's somebody you think's kind of.
Well, we're not fine. We're not saying why.
You're committing. For later.
Oh, okay.
Like, who would you like to see run against Ron DeSantis? Maybe there's somebody in Florida that is charismatic enough. I don't know. That's what I tried to do with Roger from Rhode Island. I come up with a figure that I actually admire from this period. I think he was a totally admirable character. And you can pick figures that aren't in the list or on the book. Zohan Mondani would have been one I might pick, the current mayor of New York, for example. I mean, I gave you a list of all the 20 top charismatic people that ChatGPT came up with. I could put that back on the screen if you want to see it. You could look among those.
You can look at my things. It's a difficult thing. I gotta see that sheet. That's the most one. He was. Yeah. My son very big. They would have made. But he. Yeah. Smart. You're welcome.
I didn't have this on the sheet that I had them run off. Thought of it later. Here are the top 20 charismatic political figures. You're not limited to these choices, but if you want to look through and see if there's somebody you can pick.
How did you get the?
Bernie Sanders had a big impact. A lot of people were turned on by him. You can go back in history too. It doesn't have to be somebody who's alive. Here's Vivek Ramaswamy running for governor, I think, governor of Ohio.
I agree. I mean, she's that message is politicians.
This is a list from another word processor. Claude is a good word, a good AI. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a charismatic person, certainly.
Some charismatic. He said that people around. He said that people. I don't say that should count. Okay, you want Google? Yeah. There you go. Let's see. Oh, this is I was gonna try to see if it so. Oh, are you? Oh, yes, yeah, the spelling. Nine sentences. So those are two. Good. All right. See, I chat this. It's about and say let's type it in. This is good. Yeah. Actually, I use a lot. I use it all. I mean, it's. It's a. That person. Yeah. Yeah, this is all the stuff. Set up. And then there's chat. Says at the end, there's all email stuff.
All of a sudden, she said, you know, that state of grace that she.
I think it'd be good to get your own ideas down a little bit before you try ChatGPT. If it's somebody that you really admire, what is it you admire about? What do you?
Yeah.
Bias. No, it was, yeah, so. Sit down. All of a sudden, we realize what, you know, not you, great, like the father thing out here, just like that, and yes, it comes along, and he goes, oh, choose, yeah. You know, I thought that area. That's all. She was. They were supposed to go those things, so we're just doing these meetings. Did you come up? They were playing. Okay. And it's the reverse thing that age. So they say age, yeah, that's A-R-A-L-I-N.
Have anybody out in Newland? Let's see. Michael and Nancy Coleman. You can speak right up. I think we can hear you. You have to unblock your microphones if you want to speak. They may be on break now too.
10 people. Find out. Yeah, probably. But I do have something. Would be nice.
Exactly. I can follow my engine. Yeah. Ready to sit down, listen to her. So. I didn't look at it from Paris. I would be there. As I guess anybody could be. There's my grandma's babies. And that's subjective. Yeah, I did. Yes.
Yes, it's certain times.
Oh, here's something else I brought. Thank you. Looking for somebody you can admire, Cesar Chavez, and Lado con Dolores Huerta. This is a children's book, and it gives you the idea of why you should admire these two people. Of course, this is a big scandal now because she's come out and said that he raped her and that he had a long history of abusing 12 and 13, 14-year-old girls. And that's a problem with admiring somebody. Sometimes you admire them and you don't really know everything about them, and not so good. But that's one thing. The charismatic people are, I'll pass it on around, are like models that we hold up for children to look at. I think for people who are Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Cesar Chavez was somebody. It's like their Martin Luther King. It's a holiday. They wanted a holiday. Maybe in California it's a holiday. You know, there are lots of streets named after him. Now they're changing the names and so on. So that is one of the functions of charismatic people, is that they are role models. They are people that we hold up as examples. So who have we come up with as people you admire? I assume you're sticking with Eleanor Roosevelt, I hope.
Yes, I've got one I admire is Eleanor Roosevelt. I think she was a good influence on the public in general during her lifetime, especially latter part of her lifetime. And as someone I don't admire, I'm going to do Marjorie Taylor Greene. I consider her a bad influence, and she turned a lot of people against
Green,
her.
okay. Just saying. Who you got?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, a lot younger, I admired RFK. Yes. Especially his speech in Indianapolis after Martin Luther King had died. It's probably the most inspiring.
Who was it?
RFK, Robert
Kennedy.
Robert Kennedy.
Senior.
Robert Kennedy Sr. in 1968, John's brother.
Yeah.
Okay, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, RFK gave a speech in Indianapolis to calm people who were going to riot, race riot. It's one of the most inspiring impromptu speeches I've ever heard. It was really incredible. And, you know, I followed him before that. So I kind of admired his politics. And I'm going to compare that to his son, RFK Jr.
Robert Kennedy Jr., who has gone towards the
dark side. So
I probably find a clip of that speech. I mean, that'll be on YouTube. If you know how to do that, paste it into your report, send it to me, or I can do it.
What do you got, Ted?
What do you have?
John Kennedy versus Nixon.
John Kennedy
Versus Nixon.
Okay, that's something that is covered in the book, and we'll have some time at that debate. And those are things where we will be able to have some videos.
And I still have trouble understanding how Nixon got elected.
A lot of us felt that way at the time. I'm sure you were around at the time too. We all were, so we can remember.
I didn't pick my most admired person. I picked the person that I thought would be interesting to discuss. And it was Hillary Clinton, because of the fact that she does not have charisma in most people's opinion. And most politicians do.
She is a puzzling figure. Why people don't like her, or so many people didn't like her.
That's hard to figure.
My theory is that if she'd have gotten really mad at Bill over his infidelities, then people would have voted for her.
Might have.
They thought she was too cool, and she wasn't real. That's my theory. Totally unsupported by any evidence.
Got feel.
I just put down Ruth Bader Ginsburg as she's like an expert. That's as far as a category. Because of her she just comes across as a very honest person with clarity. She's a thinker as far as coming up with decisions, and she kind of has a silent power because of that. So I don't have another person.
A lot of people hold it against her. She didn't retire before Trump came in, but everybody thought Hillary was going to win. So
yeah,
she had no way of knowing that it was going to Trump. That's a problem with old people, whether they retire or not. It doesn't matter with college professors. What would you have?
Roxanne had to leave. I'm going to say what she had. She put down James Tallarico, and I kind of agree with her on that one. And I was thinking for somebody I didn't like, this is going to sound weird, but Charlie Kirk really bothered me. He was made such a martyr over his Christian nationalism, and I don't think he's a good example of separation of church and state, and that worried me about him.
So that might be somebody I would not like.
Alarico is thought of as a person who's trying to find the charisma of the person in the middle. And you can be charismatic if you're an extremist. It's easier to have strong opinions. It's hard to be a charismatic middle of the road person, but people have done it. I mean, the people we've looked at in the past were successful at doing that, and that is something that we could look at.
There are more people following Charlie Kirk after he's been killed than even before, so I'm told. So he's become a true martyr in the sense of what he was trying to.
Of course, John Kennedy became a martyr after he was killed too, and he was more charismatic after he was elected than he was at the election time. I think, the speeches he gave were his inauguration speech and so on was very inspiring.
Now, John Kennedy had one of the best speechwriters at the time, Ted Sorensen. Ted Sorensen was the one that really wrote his famous speech, inaugural speech. And I think that had a lot to do with rejecting Kennedy's.
And of course, every president has the money to hire whoever he wants as a speechwriter, so that's a choice.
Yeah, choice.
But I think he got involved to some extent in working on his speeches, but he certainly has the staff. Did you find somebody to balance off DeSantis or?
No, not to balance.
What?
I didn't look to balance. Find somebody to balance Ron. There is no one to balance Ron DeSantis. I just thought, okay, I'd like to sit down and have lunch with and actually pay for their lunch. I first came up with Maya Angelou and I thought, well, that's nice. That'd be great. But I'm not sure I would think of her as having a lot of charisma compared with other people. And then I thought, okay, Harriet Tubman was another one. If I'd like to sit down and talk with somebody, and I figured she had a lot of charisma, because how else would a zillion people follow her and know that she was mother?
I don't have to be political candidates. I mean,
Right.
cultural figures are good to look at.
But let me tell you who's the opposite of that, would be Madeleine Murray O'Hare. So Harriet Tubman would be extremely religious, and her faith was very, very deep. And she exuded her faith, and there were a lot of believers that followed her because of her faith. And then you got Madeleine Murray O'Hare, who's the total opposite. How's that? Okay. I only come up with one so far.
You have a week.
Yeah, I know.
I put Sarah Palin at one end.
Sarah Palin?
Correct. She's,
Okay, that's an interesting person to look at.
I don't have my second one, my admirer one yet.
Okay.
I have Hillary Clinton as somebody I admire, and Erica Kirk on the other side of that. Erica Kirk.
Sarah Kirk.
Yeah, she does.
She saying she was gonna forgive the assassins.
Yeah.
That was the one who speech they brought her to the general public.
Yeah.
Okay.
You admire her or you don't admire her?
You know,
What have you guys got?
The one I dislike, hates it. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, I'm gonna say.
It's military.
You
And
stole it.
I'm trying to find somebody I like. Wait, no.
Got nobody or
Okay, the one that I liked is Michelle Obama. Yeah, I thought she was a wonderful role model for women. And at one time, I believe, maybe still she's the most admired character, female character in the country. And I think she is
famous for saying when they go low, we go high.
She
Maybe
was.
this wasn't a good political strategy, we don't know, but.
She was her own person, though. She did not sacrifice herself to the fact that her husband was the president. She remained Michelle Obama. So a negative really great. I felt that he did a lot of harm. He completely blurred the line between church and state. He imposed religion upon political leaders. I mean, they were open to it, obviously, but I think that's a total mistake.
All right. You got somebody?
Toby Spencer. Toby Spencer, former sheriff of Dark County, Ohio,
Yeah.
my boss. Very, very genuine person.
Okay. I'm glad to get some people that are new that didn't occur to me. That's all the better.
So far I have Al Gore.
Al Gore.
I feel that he is the face of environmentalism. That he's the one that made it the big issue. He brought it out to mainstream media.
His failure was his personality, that he couldn't sell himself, right?
Just recently he came out and said all of his predictions that he made 20 years ago, correct, or have been correct. Which, because one of those predictions was severe. And I still working on it. Positive. Somebody I admire. And I think what you said, somebody, look, I would somebody that I'd like to sit down and talk to, but that's, I think, that's a good way to. Fair amount.
I have for positive Malala, it's so, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but she's a Pakistani activist. And she's escaped Taliban and advocates for children's girls' education.
She's the Pakistani origin, she's in America.
Yes, yes, she wrote several books and done some speeches, so very, very, done a lot to help.
Hey, we have an interesting list here. Are people gonna hand these in to me, or should I wait for you to email me, more complete? Why don't I do both? Hand the sheet in so I have a list. And also send me something when you get it. Elaborate.
But I have this,
I may search around for people, things too on these people,
can I have a blank,
so, yeah.
can I have a blank,
What?
can I have a blank sheet? If I have-
Yeah, I got some more right up there, huh?
Okay.
You still don't have anybody. Probably, right?
Yeah.
You guys find anybody else?
Right on there, but.
But we have your email address.
Yeah. She wanted another sheet? I think there's some more there, or she has.
Ma'am,
Could we have your email address?
it's right up
Your
there.
email address.
Yeah.
Oh, it's-
I'll,
Oh, I see it.
it's up there on the screen, actually, on all the. See if I have it. I'll email you with the request for these too. So, you can put it, if you want to put together a PowerPoint presentation, if you're familiar with PowerPoint, that's fine. If you just want to send it to me in Word or whatever, anything, any format is fine. You send me a PowerPoint, I'll be able to share it with the class. All right, so I've got quite a few here. Some of these getting that analysis of personality may be harder for people than the policies that they espouse in terms of why they turn out to be charismatic. I was trying to get through the whole century here. I don't know if I made it, how far I've made it or not, but I can talk quicker. At the dawn of the 19th century, 19th century is the 1800s, right? Yeah, more and more people began to think about mastery. Shawnee Chief rode down a line of British officers, Tecumseh. Now that is an interesting phenomenon. He was our enemy. He fought in battles against us, and yet people were extremely admiring of him. His primary American foe, William Henry Harrison, described him as one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order. He created a whole alliance among a number of tribes. He was also 6 feet tall, which was high for the time, and sort of a imposing presence. Let's look at this clip here.
I'm Tecumseh, and I was born in 1768 into the Shawnee Nation, a proud people who lived in the Ohio Valley. As I grew, I became a warrior, fighting to defend our homeland. But I soon realized that individual tribes fighting alone could never withstand the relentless tide of settlers. Unity, I believed, was our only hope. I began traveling to villages, speaking to different tribes, urging them to join as one great confederation to resist the loss of our lands. My brother, Tenswatawa, known as the Prophet, became an important part of our movement. Together, we built a settlement called Prophetstown, a place of hope and unity for the tribes. In 1811, while I was away seeking more allies, Prophetstown was approached by U.S. forces under General William Harrison. It was that approach that prompted my brother to attack in the Battle of Tippecanoe. Though my brother's warriors fought bravely, they were defeated, and Prophetstown was destroyed. It was a devastating blow, but it only intensified our resolve.
Well, he's a sort of an image of bravery, of courage, of resolution.
I'm Tecumseh.
Made him very popular. This is apparently what he actually looked like, as opposed to the video that we saw there. I don't know that it looked too much like him. Here is, I didn't get to Michael and Nancy who are online. Are you guys there today? You didn't answer before. I don't know if they're online. Tell us who you picked.
This is Michael, and I admire Bernie Sanders. I think he has charisma. Never got elected president, but I think he had a popular following.
You heard what he said, I hope? Make a note of it and tell me later, because I can't hear it. How about Nancy? Nancy, are you there? Michael, put your picture on. Let's see what you look like. If I had this open. Actually, if I look on here, I probably would have gotten what he said on the text. I didn't think to look at that.
I'm getting an alert that I cannot start my video because it is disabled by the host.
Can you hear me now?
Your video is disabled by the host? Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, this is Nancy, and I have not picked a name yet.
That's Nancy, and she has not picked a name yet. See, I get the closed captions on my phone.
And I'm getting a lot of feedback, so it's hard for me to understand some of the words.
Okay. Anybody else in Zoom land who we haven't heard from yet? Yeah, it's sort of a mystery to me why he was so admired. There are many people who named their children after him, viewed him as just an exemplary model of courage, resolution, that sort of thing. This was out in Indiana. You can go visit this Prophetstown, but there's nothing left of it really. It's just a monument saying where it is. They had a whole town in it. I'm taking this course on Thursdays on poetry. Is anybody else here in the poetry club? Yeah, one of the things that you get in the poetry class is he's talking about how poetry antedates print and antedates writing. And at the time, books of poetry were an important medium for communicating people's charisma and creating leaders. And there's this book, Tecumseh, the Warrior of the West. It's a poem in 4 cantos with notes. People wrote long poems about people in order to convey their feelings. I've got some quotes here from it. He stood his brow like one on whom a nation's fate was cast. His voice went forth, a triumphant tone that stirred each warrior's heart. One land, one cause, one destiny shall bind the red man's hand. The spirit of the mighty past spoke burning from his tongue. Each eye grew bright, each bosom heaved, as if one soul possessed them all. The pale face comes with lying words. I speak the truth of right. I don't think we need a poetry professor to interpret what these things mean. These poems, they pretty much come out and say what they mean. You can buy this book online. You can get it bound in leather. People have it on their shelf of their display books, or you can get the text as a PDF for free if you want to just read it for nothing. So it's available. Whether it's good poetry or not, I don't know. There's a second one with almost the same title, written by somebody else. They're written by somebody who was a major in the British Army. Tecumseh was actually allied with the British and had a British uniform, although he didn't usually wear it. He usually dressed as a native Shawnee. But he was trying to protect the lands of the natives from the incursions of settlers, which ultimately failed. He was killed, but he died honorably and was remembered as a great leader. The opposite politics is Andrew Jackson, who drove the Indians out of Tennessee right out to Oklahoma, and generally was, however, also viewed as a person of strength, a person of power, also a person who had, he wasn't a learned person. He didn't consider both sides of the issue. That's what scholars do. On this side and then on that hand, it was Harry Truman said he wanted a one-handed economist because every economist he talked to would say, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. He came out with an answer in many ways similar to Trump, and as somebody who trusts his own intuitive feelings and is decisive, even though he may be completely wrong, but he's decisive about it. He knows what he's doing. Mystical intuition allowed him to reach conclusions without analysis of evidence. He appealed to the masses of people that were disenfranchised by the elites, people who didn't have had trouble getting the vote, may not have had enough property to get a vote. With his informal education, he might not make a good cabinet member or a bureaucrat, but he had the more valuable gift for cutting through policy details, the instinct for clarity that Clausewitz would have accepted. He was clear about what he was saying. That seems to be important in getting a charismatic following. He invited prostitutes to a town ball, challenged men to duels. A lot of our founding fathers fought duels and so on. That's something that's gone out of style. I don't think duels are illegal, I guess, but they were then too, and they did them anyway. So that's just the term that's in the book that I didn't see if I've got another chapter. That was chapter 5, wasn't it? Okay, we're going on to chapter 5. I'm going to at least touch on some of these things. I'm sure you've all read them carefully in the book by now. There's a big concentration of social movements and religious movements in upstate New York. Nobody really knows quite why. This is where the Mormons appeared. And that's a very interesting person in terms of American history. The Shakers were in upstate New York. The Public Universal Friends started a community called New Jerusalem. And this is Joseph Smith, who found the golden tablets that founded the Mormon religion. And it is bizarre in a lot of ways to see why it's successful. Do we have any members of the Latter-day Saints, any Mormons here in the room? There is a Mormon temple here in Marietta, I believe, so there is a group here. He was the founder of the Latter-day Saints. He was by profession a con man. What he did is he led people on trips to find buried treasure left by pirates, which he would raise money from people for an expedition to seek out buried treasure. But where did the pirates bury their treasure? You might think they'd bury it near the seacoast somewhere or on an island or something. No, it was up in Vermont. Like they sailed 300 miles up the river to bury their treasure in upstate Vermont. And he persuaded people to do that. And he had various things like a magical gourd or something he would stare into. It's sort of like where you find things by, you could find underwater with a wand or something. He would go around and find things like that. And that's how he was making his living as really a con man. He never found any buried gold. He always had a good excuse, and next time will be different, and managed to drag people along. He had that personality where you believe him and you want to believe him somehow. It's unfortunate we don't have a recording of him. I'd like to have a recording. He claimed to have found a buried golden tablets, which had been left by some religious figures that were affiliated with the Native Americans. He thought the Native Americans were the lost tribes of Israel, and they had written a history which became the Book of Mormon, and it was written on these golden tablets in a language that no one else could read. He managed to read it and transcribed it, and he came out with a whole new religious text. You know, the Book of Mormon is like the New Testament of the Americas. Mark Twain didn't think much of it. He said if he had left out the phrase, and it came to pass, it would have been half as long. It seemed like every sentence paragraph began with it came to pass. But he had these golden tablets, but God told him he couldn't show them to anybody. He had them in a burlap bag, and they could pick them up and hold them, but they couldn't see them. And then God told him to bury them again. He never actually showed anybody the golden tablets, but people buy that, and people go with it. He also developed a theory of plural marriage, which became the most controversial part of the Mormon religion, that men could have multiple wives and women could have two husbands. Unlike other forms of plural marriage, it's not just the men, but the way the Mormon marriage worked, the woman has a husband, just like one wife to a husband, and lives with her husband and so on. But she also marries Joseph Smith. And so he had like 30 wives, but they all lived with their original husbands who supported them and so on. He didn't have to have like a harem full of wives. And the other Mormon leader did this later. Brigham Young, who the university is named after, had 30 some wives as well. This became a big issue with the rest of the country. I know when my grandfather immigrated from Lithuania, I saw his immigration papers, and one of the things he had to swear to was he was not a believer in polygamy. You couldn't become an immigrant if you were a believer in polygamy. Finally, the Mormon church managed to get a revelation that this was no longer valid, and they abandoned it, although there are Mormon groups who still follow the plural marriage, or they're smaller groups. And they organized a very tightly bound religion where people really are committed to each other. And that seems to be the key to their success. I remember my ex-wife, she had a girlfriend who was a Mormon. And one day the minister said, "We want you to take this woman into your house. She's having psychiatric problems. There's no place to live. She's a member of the church. It's your duty to, you're going to take her in. If you're a Mormon, they watch over you. They take care of you. And tell you how to live and what to do. It's very demanding. It's successful. They moved to Ohio out of New York. They sort of get driven out of places. You can go up north of Cleveland, just to the right of Cleveland. There's a Mormon temple you can visit. Then they moved to Illinois, trying to start another community, and he got attacked by vigilantes and murdered along with his brother. And then they moved on further to Utah, the Great Salt Lake, and that's where they're centered now. There's a great play called The Book of Mormon. I think it's just stopped running. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's a comedy. But he was a very charismatic person, apparently. Some people think he may have had a manic depressive illness, and that does seem to be a characteristic. Somebody has, in the manic phase, you're really powerful, you're really expressing a lot of emotion. That seems like some charismatic leaders have that particular diagnosis, and then they have a period of depression after that, or alternating with depression and the manic phase. Mary Hales, this is one person, said, on shaking hands with Joseph Smith, I received the Holy Spirit in such great abundance that I felt it thrill my whole system, from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. I thought I had never beheld so lovely a countenance. Nobility and goodness were in every feature. That's how people seem to feel about him. Unfortunately, he's not recorded. This is a short somebody
I
made up.
have to say that I translated the Book of Mormon from golden plates. Then I said I found buried in a hillside. The book is considered a sacred text by my followers and recounts the ancient history of indigenous peoples in the Americas.
Whether that's really what he looked like or sounded like, I have no idea. This is an attack coming from a traditional Christian group. It's too long. I'm going to just show you a clip from it, starting at 4 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll have to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What's happening? There's something up here. It's
Flight records was supposed to be written on golden plates and buried by Moroni, the last living Nephite in the hill Camor. 1400 years later, a young treasure seeker named Joseph Smith, who was known for his tall tales, claimed to have uncovered these same gold plates near his home in upstate New York. He is now honored by Mormons as a prophet because he claimed to have had visions from the spirit world in which he was commanded to organize the Mormon church, because all Christian creeds were an abomination. It was Joseph Smith who originated most of these peculiar doctrines, which millions today believe to be true. By maintaining a rigid code of financial and moral requirements and through performing sacred temple rituals for themselves and the dead, the Latter-day Saints hope to prove their worthiness and thus become gods. The Mormons teach that everyone must stand at the final judgment before Joseph Smith, the Mormon Jesus, and Elohim. Those Mormons who are sealed in the eternal marriage ceremony expect to become.
This guy obviously doesn't care for them, but it's interesting to see the pictures, and the Mormons still, they sort of downplay a lot of those beliefs. They haven't abandoned them. It's a very novel theology. The idea is that God was once a human being before he became a god, and he perfected himself to become God, and that we can become gods as well and populate the universe. There are some people who are into going beyond the human body, people who are into science fiction who view it as the religion of futurism, and how we will go beyond the human form, download ourselves into robots and populate the universe. It's susceptible to those sorts of things. Now George Romney was a Muslim, and that became an issue in the campaign. And a lot of Christian groups do not accept them as being Christian. Well, they call themselves now the Church of Jesus Christ. They're just the Church of Jesus Christ, and they left the Latter-day Saints off most of the time, which is not really distinctive. There's lots of churches of Jesus Christ. I think that Mormon is a distinctive brand, but and so people still refer to them that way. Let's see. Joseph Smith had a gift for managing people's desire for a deliberate step from skepticism to confidence. He stressed the sort of proof that could win over a curious doubter and make that doubter feel privy to a hidden world. He had an impressive volume of new scripture, set him apart from other evangelists. He copyrighted the text, charged for each copy, put him in the class of fraudsters. He wanted to make money off his book. He was only 24-year-old. He had no particular formal education, but he managed to really inspire people. Here's the quote I gave you from Mark Twain. I see our time is up. I made it most of the way through the 19th century. I may not touch on everybody. Next week, we'll do the 20th century. We'll get another century out of the way. So we'll look at some of the people. Now, there are both political figures and a lot of religious figures and spiritualists, people who contact the dead. That was a big movement. There are different movements that we can look at, which are curious. And I look forward to getting reports from you in the mail when you research some of your people. It's all right to cheat and use have AI write it for you. Don't hesitate to do that. So I'll see you next week. It's 5 o'clock. Any last words from you people in Zoom land?
Thank you. Yes. Are you